I didn't fight back. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled, slid an envelope across the table, and watched my mother-in-law's face go completely white. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 3 years believing that if I was just patient enough, kind enough, accommodating enough, my husband's family would eventually accept me. That if I kept my head down and kept writing checks when they asked, they would one day look at me and think, she's one of us. They never did. And the moment I finally understood that, really understood it down in my bones, was the day everything changed. I work in insurance fraud investigation. Have for 6 years. I spend my days reading documents that people think are airtight, finding the one thread that unravels the whole sweater. I'm good at it. My supervisor once told me I have a gift for pattern recognition, that I notice things other people train themselves not to see. My mother-in-law called it being paranoid. My father-in-law called it a personality problem. My husband, his name was Cliff, called it exhausting. We got married when I was 28. I thought I knew what I was walking into. Cliff had warned me, sort of. He'd said his mother was particular, and his father was old-fashioned, and his younger brother was going through a rough patch. He said it the way you describe weather. Just facts. Nothing to worry about. The brother's name was Tate. 26 years old, never held a job longer than 4 months. Owed money to no fewer than 3 people that I knew of personally. He was charming in the way that empty rooms are sometimes charming. All space, no furniture, nothing to actually sit on. Tate had been in a car accident 8 months before our wedding. Not a terrible one, a fender bender that somehow, through what I still believe was a combination of exaggeration and a very motivated chiropractor, became a 6-month physical therapy situation. He got a settlement, $42,000. It was gone in 11 months. I know because Cliff told me. He said it quietly, the way you say something you're embarrassed about. And I nodded and said that was too bad, and I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. The first time my mother-in-law asked us for money, it was $400. Tate needed help with rent. Just this once, she said. She had this way of framing things, not as requests exactly, but as situations where the only moral option happened to benefit her. She'd lay out the problem like a math equation and look at you like the answer was obvious. We gave her the $400. The second time was $800, car repair. Then $1,400 for a dental bill, then $2,000 because Tate had gotten behind on his credit card and the interest was killing him. Each time, Cliff would mention it to me almost apologetically, like he already knew the answer and just needed me to confirm it. Each time I said yes. I said yes because I was trying. I said yes because I loved my husband and I believed he loved me and I thought that meant his family, and I would eventually find our way to something real. I said yes because I kept telling myself this was temporary. Tate was going through a rough patch. He'd get on his feet. Things would stabilize. What actually happened was that my father-in-law started calling me directly. The first time I didn't answer. The second time I picked up because I thought something was wrong. He got right to it. Tate needed help. There was a guy Tate owed money to. Not a bank, not a credit card company, the way he said, a guy made the hair on my arm stand up. And this guy was not being patient about it. My father-in-law said the number was $9,000. He said it needed to happen fast. He said, and this is the part I still think about. He said, "Your family now. This is what family does." I said I needed to talk to Cliff. My father-in-law said, "Cliff already knows." I hung up and called Cliff. He didn't deny it. He said the situation was serious and he thought we should help and he'd already looked at our savings and we could cover it without too much trouble. He said all of this in the same even tone he used when he was telling me about traffic or what he wanted for dinner. Like this was a normal thing. Like I was the unusual one for needing a moment. I told him I needed to think about it. That night, while Cliff slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and I started going through our accounts. Not because I suspected anything, not yet. Just because I needed to see the numbers clearly. I needed to understand exactly what $9,000 meant for us. What I found instead was a credit inquiry I hadn't authorized. One inquiry dated 6 weeks prior for a personal loan application. My name, my social security number, an address I didn't recognize. I sat very still for a long time. Then I opened a new tab and pulled up the full credit report. There were 2 of them. 2 loan applications, both in my name, both submitted in the past 4 months. One had been denied, one was still pending. I closed the laptop. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists the way my mother taught me when I was little and needed to calm down fast. I looked at my face in the mirror for a while. I thought, okay, let's think about this carefully. Because here's the thing about working in fraud investigation. When you find something like that, your first instinct isn't panic. It's documentation. It's preservation of evidence. It's making sure you understand the full shape of what you're looking at before you do anything that might disturb it. So I didn't say anything to Cliff, not that night. Instead, I started building a file. Over the next 3 weeks, I requested my complete credit history from all 3 bureaus. I contacted the lender where the pending application was sitting and placed a fraud alert. I spoke with a consumer protection attorney, just a consultation, just to understand my options. I started keeping records of every financial conversation I'd had with Cliff's family, dates, amounts, exact quotes, when I could remember them. I found 4 accounts total, 3 in various stages of application. One that had actually been opened, a store credit card with a $2,000 limit that had been maxed out on what appeared to be electronics purchases and a flight to Las Vegas. The flight was booked 6 weeks before our wedding. I remember reading that and just sitting with it for a while, the specific timeline of it. Someone had sat down, taken my information they only had because I was about to become part of this family, and used it while I was busy buying centerpieces and addressing envelopes and building what I thought was a life. I called my attorney back. I told her what I'd found. She said the word she used was actionable. She said I had options and she wanted to make sure I understood all of them before I made any decisions. I told her I wasn't ready to make decisions yet. I said I needed one more thing first. I needed to understand who had done it. The store card application had been filled out online. The IP address on file, my attorney's contact at the lender was helpful, within the appropriate legal channels, traced back to an address in Cliff's parents' neighborhood. Not their house. Close enough. Tate had an apartment 4 blocks from his parents. I'd been there once for a birthday dinner that his mother had inexplicably decided to host there instead of at her own house. It was the right neighborhood. I also found, in reviewing some paperwork Cliff had left on the kitchen counter, not snooping, it was just sitting there, face up, next to the coffee maker, a document that appeared to be a co-signer agreement. Cliff's name was on it. So was mine. My signature looked almost right. Almost. I photographed it. I sent the photo to my attorney. She said she'd be in touch. 2 days later, Cliff told me his parents wanted to have us over for Sunday dinner. He said his mother had made a roast. He said it in that carefully casual way that meant something else was happening, and he knew it and he didn't want to have the conversation about it before we got there. I said that sounded nice. I wore the grey blazer I wear when I testify in depositions. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or something else. The house smelled like pot roast and potpourri, the way it always did. My mother-in-law hugged me at the door, which she almost never did. My father-in-law was already seated at the head of the table. Tate came in from the kitchen with a beer and gave me a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. We ate. We talked about nothing, the weather, a neighbour's new fence, a cousin's graduation. My mother-in-law refilled my water glass twice without being asked. Cliff kept his eyes on his plate. After the dishes were cleared, my father-in-law folded his hands on the table and looked at me. "We need to talk about Tate's situation," he said. I nodded. I said, "Okay." My mother-in-law said Tate had made some mistakes, but he was trying to turn things around, and the most important thing right now was that the family rally together. She said the word together like it had special weight, like she'd been practicing it. My father-in-law said the total amount Tate currently needed to get clear of everything was $47,000. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, direct, already decided. He said with Cliff's income and mine, it was manageable. He said we'd be protecting the family's name. I said, 47,000. He said, yes. I said, and you're asking both of us or just me? There was a small silence. My mother-in-law looked at her hands. My father-in-law said, you have the savings. Which was true. I did. I had saved diligently since my first real paycheck at 22. I had an emergency fund and a brokerage account and a Roth IRA that I'd been maxing out for 4 years. Cliff knew this. His family knew this apparently in the specific and detailed way that you know things you've thought carefully about. I said, can I ask a question first? My father-in-law said, sure. I said, was anyone going to tell me about the credit applications, or was the plan to just keep going until something stuck? The silence this time was different, longer. My mother-in-law's expression did something complicated. Tate took a long drink of his beer and looked at the ceiling. Cliff said my name, just my name in a tone I'd never heard him use before. Something between warning and apology, and I wasn't sure which part was for me and which was for his family. My father-in-law said he didn't know what I was talking about. I reached into my blazer pocket and set a folder on the table. 4 accounts, I said. 3 applications and 1 open card. Here are the inquiry dates, the application IP address, and a copy of the co-signer document with what appears to be my forged signature. My attorney has the originals. Nobody said anything. The card that was actually opened, I said, was used for electronics and a flight to Las Vegas. The flight was in March, 6 weeks before our wedding. I looked at Tate when I said that last part. He was still looking at the ceiling. My mother-in-law said, now wait. My father-in-law said, we can talk about this like adults. I said, I'd like to finish. And something in my voice. I don't know exactly what, maybe just the steadiness of it, maybe just the fact that I wasn't shaking the way they'd expected me to be, made them both stop. I said that I had placed fraud alerts with all 3 bureaus. I said I had filed a report with the FTC and that a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office was in progress. I said that my attorney had advised me that the forged cosigner document alone constituted a felony under state law, and that the identity theft charges were separate and additional. I said all of this the way I say it in depositions, clearly, without inflection, making sure every word landed exactly where I intended it. Then I said that I had not yet decided whether to move forward with criminal charges. My mother-in-law started to cry. Real tears are real enough. I've learned the difference doesn't always matter. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said Tate had problems, real problems, and that's what family was for. She said if Cliff had known the full situation, he would have handled it differently, and this didn't have to become what I was making it. I looked at Cliff when she said that. He was looking at the table. I said, Cliff, did you know about the applications? He didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. He said finally that he'd known Tate had looked into some options, but he hadn't known the specifics. He said he thought it had just been exploratory. He said he was sorry. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I'm not going to pay Tate's debt. My father-in-law's jaw tightened. He said that family takes care of family. He said I had benefited from being a part of this family, the dinners, the holidays, the relationships, and that came with obligations. He said the word obligations like he was reading it off a contract. I said, what I've contributed to this family in the past 3 years is approximately $22,000 in loans that were never repaid, plus whatever Tate charged on the fraudulent card before I caught it. I have records of all of it. My mother-in-law said, "You kept records?" I said, "I keep records of everything. It's my job." My father-in-law stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but he had a way of using his height anyway, the way some men do. Like altitude is an argument. He said this was not how this was going to go. He said I needed to understand the position I was putting this family in. He said some things that I won't repeat here because they revealed more about him than I want to give space to. And then he moved to stand between me and the door. I had been waiting for this, or something like it. You get a sense in this work for when a situation is about to change shape. I took out my phone. I said, "I want you to know that I called 911 from the car before I came inside. I told them I was attending a meeting that might become confrontational and I left the line open. They've been listening for the past 40 minutes. Nobody moved. I said, everything said in this room tonight is on record." My father-in-law sat back down. I picked up my folder. I said I would be in touch through my attorney regarding the fraud charges and that they should expect to hear from her within the week. I said I hoped for everyone's sake that we could resolve the financial piece without going further, but that was going to depend entirely on their next steps. I walked to the door. My father-in-law didn't move to stop me. Cliff followed me out. We sat in the car for a long time without speaking. The 911 dispatcher had already disconnected. I'd texted them a code word we'd agreed on to let them know the situation had resolved safely. Cliff stared through the windshield at his parents' front porch light. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, 3 weeks. He said, "And you didn't tell me." I said, "I needed to understand what I was looking at first." He said he was sorry. He said it several times in different ways, like he was trying to find the version that would do enough. I believed that he meant it. I also understood, sitting there in the dark in front of his parents' house, that being sorry and being safe were not the same thing. We are no longer married. That part took another 6 months to fully resolve, and it was its own kind of grief, the loss of what I'd believed we were, more than what we'd actually been. Cliff was not a malicious person, but he had spent 34 years learning how to look away from things his family did, and that is not a habit that breaks easily, or quickly, or maybe at all. Tate accepted a plea agreement on 2 counts of identity theft and 1 count of document fraud. He did not go to prison, which I won't pretend I felt entirely neutral about. He did receive 3 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a restitution order. My mother-in-law sent me 1 email after the sentencing. It said I had destroyed her family. I did not respond. My father-in-law has not contacted me. The fraudulent accounts have been fully removed from my credit report. My score, which had taken a temporary hit during the investigation process, is now 12 points higher than it was before any of this started. I find that detail quietly satisfying in a way I can't entirely explain. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I'd always liked, but never lived in because Cliff had preferred somewhere else. I have a good coffee maker and a window that gets morning light, and a cat named something embarrassing that I won't share here. I don't think about them as much as I expected to. That surprised me at first, how quickly the space they'd taken up in my head just cleared. Like a storm that felt permanent while it was happening and then just stopped, and you walk outside and the air is clean and the sky is completely ordinary. I spent a long time thinking I had to earn my place in that family, that if I gave enough, was patient enough, absorbed enough, eventually they'd see me as real, as worth keeping, as someone whose name you didn't forge on loan documents while she was writing your son's wedding vows. What I know now is that some people will take everything you offer and still feel entitled to more. And the most important document I ever signed was the one my attorney filed on a Tuesday morning in October. The one that started the process of making sure my name could never be used again without my knowledge. Freedom doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just looks like a clean credit report and a window with good light and finally. There's a version of this story where I walked into that Sunday dinner angry, where I threw the folder down instead of setting it gently on the table, where I said everything I'd held back for 3 years all at once, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I used to imagine that version sometimes in the weeks I was building my file. It felt satisfying in the way that imaginary things do. Clean, total, final. But that's not what happened, and I think the reason it didn't come down to something I had to earn slowly, over years of work that nobody ever thanked me for. Tate made his choices. He sat down at a computer and typed my social security number into a loan application, and then he did it again, and then he opened a credit card in my name and flew to Las Vegas 6 weeks before I walked down an aisle and promised to be part of his family. Those were decisions, each one a small, deliberate step in a direction he chose. And the thing about choices like that, the quiet, calculated ones, is that they don't disappear, they accumulate. They leave records. They create a shape that someone trained to look for shapes will eventually find. I found it. What I'd been thinking about since, the thing I keep coming back to, is that I wasn't protected by luck. I wasn't protected by anyone stepping in or doing the right thing. I was protected by the fact that I'd spent 6 years learning how to see clearly when other people were counting on me not to. That's not a gift. That's work. That's thousands of hours of training myself to ask the next question when the first answer sounds convenient. To look at a document and ask not just what it says but what it's trying to hide. My mother-in-law cried at that table and said I was tearing the family apart. I've thought about that a lot, because the truth is, the family was already torn. It had been torn for a long time, held together with the unspoken agreement that I would keep absorbing the damage and never name what was happening. The moment I named it, she called it destruction. But naming a wound isn't the same as making it. The wound was already there. Cliff was not a villain. He was someone who had learned very young that looking away was safer than seeing clearly. I understood that. I still do. But understanding why someone can't protect you doesn't mean you should stay in the place where protection is required. The restitution order won't give me back the 3 years. It won't give me back the $22,000 that left our accounts in small enough increments that it felt almost reasonable at the time. What it gave me was something harder to put a number on. The confirmation that what happened was real, that I was not paranoid or difficult or a problem to be managed, that a court of law agreed the word for what Tate did was fraud. There's something I want to say to anyone who recognizes pieces of this story in their own life. Not advice, exactly. Just what I know now that I didn't know then. The patience it takes to document instead of react. That's not weakness. The clarity it takes to see a pattern your own husband won't see. That's not coldness. And the decision to walk out of a room where someone has positioned themselves between you and the door, calmly with your evidence in hand and 911 on the line, that's not cruelty. That's just knowing your own worth well enough to defend it. My credit score is 12 points higher than it was before any of this started. My apartment gets good morning light. The door has a lock, and I'm the only one with a key. Some things cost exactly what they're worth.